The topic is Brown versus the Board of Education and Historical Black Colleges, and we're talking to Dr. Al-Hadid. Dr. Al-Hadid, you talked about historical black colleges being primarily under the influence of the majority population, and in a real sense these institutions have moved away from their traditional purpose in terms of the education of African Americans in almost an exclusive kind of situation, even though these institutions were never separated or segregated themselves, that for the most part they are not able to perform the kind of work that they were able to perform prior to, let us say, 1954. What can you do, what can be done in order to bring these institutions to a mission of recognizing the importance of providing cultural information and similar kinds of information for their originally intended population?
Okay. Well, I think we have to start with the definition of the problem. The problem is that HBCUs, whether in the public sector or the private sector, are literally under siege. They're under siege either by state government, in terms of state government having the instrumentality to change them into predominantly white schools, or they're under siege by the private sector in terms of your private schools, because the corporation is saying, unless you generate the kind of people we want you to generate, and unless you allow us to control your schools, then we are not going to funnel money into those institutions. So they're basically under siege, whether they're in the private or the public sector. Now, how can we liberate ourselves from this form of academic and intellectual colonization? Well, what we have to realize is that when you look at an academic institution, especially a university, those universities transmit three commodities. First of all, they transmit culture. Secondly, they transmit knowledge. And third, they transmit skills. Now, historically, the HBCUs have done an excellent job in the transmittal of knowledge and skills, useful knowledge so you can get gainful employment. Where we have fallen short is that we have not canonized our own culture in the academic product that we are producing. So the first order of business is that we need to revisit the general education core curriculum and also the core curriculum within each department at the university, and make sure that we have built into the general education core curriculum knowledge about our own history and culture. In other words, the curriculum should be shaped in our image, not in the image of somebody we want to work for, but in our own image. Because the only weapon that we really have against academic colonization is culture. It was culture that allowed us to survive slavery. It was culture that allowed us to survive Reconstruction. It was culture that allowed us to survive segregation. And it's going to take culture that will allow us to survive an era of desegregation when we appear to be confused about who and what we are. And the historically black colleges have always provided us with some markers and a map by which we could navigate our way through America in terms of its contradictions of democracy and equality. So then I would say that we need to retrain and re-educate our administrators. Because one of the problems that we have is weak leadership. Many of our administrators feel that unless they submit to the white power structure, that they're going to lose their jobs. And therefore, in fear of losing their jobs, then they don't really give our young people the kind of knowledge that they need to survive in America.
You know, I heard you say one time, and let's have you to expand upon this, because I think this goes down the same line, that many of the young people who come to historically black institutions of higher education are what you call culturally illiterate.
That's true.
From a sociological point of view, what are you saying here?
Yeah, maybe that term, I remember using that on the previous program we did. But let me take the edge off of that. I simply mean that they do not have...
No, I'm not implying that it has an edge to it. I mean, I think it's, there's a point. Go on.
Yeah, the point is that they do not have a deep-rooted knowledge of their culture, their history, because they have been basically bussed out of their culture. So when they were sent from our neighborhoods to a hostile neighborhood in order to get an education in the K through 12 experience, they were alienated from the culture. So when they came back home, I mean, they did not really appreciate the value of the culture that they left going on the other side of town, you know, to get an education. So many of our students, in fact, I think most of them that are of African descent, select HBCUs because they come seeking the culture. And then when they come to these HBCUs, they experience cultural shock because the curriculum itself is Europe-centered. They're trying to educate these young people in terms of a black Anglo-Saxon education. So we really need to give them what they came for rather than doing a bait and switch. And then we attract them because they think it's a black school. And then the only thing that we give them is a step show, homecoming, and the drum line, you know, at halftime, you know. And that's not the culture.
What carries the culture.
That's an expression of the culture. That's a non-material expression of the culture. We need to give them the culture, which means that we need to spend a whole semester talking about different aspects of our economic system, different aspects of our political system, our social systems, our family system. We need to put a value on our culture. I think we have a culture and a history that is worthy of serious study, not just something we do during Black History Month or something that we do on Martin Luther King's birthday. They've been through that in high school. So we don't need to fool them again once they get to college. We need to give them a whole semester of culture and history and the sociology of the black community, the politics of the black community, the psychological impact of slavery and colonization, you know, what the African American family is really all about. And the only thing they know about the family is what they see on the Cosby Show. They don't know that we really have values and mores and norms, that our family is a very serious institution. And then we need to be able to link them up with their African heritage, not just the fact that there were people in Africa that built pyramids, but they need to know specific details. I mean, they should be able to run down the 33 dynasties in Egypt. They should be able to talk about the Sudanic Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Mali Empire, and know all about the greatness, because what has happened here is that our young people have been bamboozled to believe that civilization started with the Greeks, you know, and therefore they have Greek letter organizations, and we canonize the Greeks, you know, in our curriculum. But we had civilizations thousands of years before Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle showed up on the planet, or even before there were Greeks in Greece. I mean, we had dynastic periods in Egypt or in the Nile Valley, in Ethiopia, and the area that we know today as the Sudan. And our people know nothing about that. And then when most of our students are of Christian faith, and when they read the Old Testament, they need to realize that they're reading our history. Because they're talking about the Ethiopians, they're talking about the Egyptians and the Babylonians. That's our history. And we need to be able to interpret that, you know, from that standpoint, you know, to show the historical and cultural link with our spirituality and our religion.
Now, and do you believe that at historical black colleges there's sort of reluctance on the part of those individuals who are in administrative positions to bring about this knowledge and to create a situation for this knowledge?
Black administrators fear a black planet. They view the world the same way that white people do. They think like white people and act like white people and have anxiety about the white ruling class. So they are dysfunctional in terms of being able to help us because they're so timid about pleasing white overseers. And so I think they need to come out of that. I mean, you know, Martin Luther King came through and he took the fear out of most of us, but that fear still lingers in some of us. Those of us that were in the ghettos in the community, Malcolm X came along and took the fear out of us. So we shouldn't be afraid now of white power. We should be able to affirm our own existence, affirm our own culture. And that's what everybody else is doing, you know. But what we're doing now, we're still playing this 1950 game of race relations, rather than talking about affirming our heritage, affirming our culture, and speaking from our own center, speaking truth to power, and not being afraid to speak truth to power, organizing around our own values, our own norms, and creating a world in our own image, rather than trying to be a carbon copy or imitation of somebody else's society. You know?
Over the last 50 seconds that we have, Doctor, what would you say to young people today to become involved in trying to acquire this cultural knowledge that you're talking about?
Well, I'd say that they should go and purchase as many books as they can afford about their history and culture. And when you go to their homes, they probably have more CDs than they have books about their history and culture. So every time you buy a CD, buy a book about your history and culture. So then you could look at the history, look at the culture, start studying African languages. Start, in other words, you got to start thinking black in order to be black. Black is not just something you get by accident.
Very good. And of course, let me thank you, Dr. Al-Hadid, for bringing that excellent information. And I think that this is the capstone of a series that we're certainly encouraged in having. And of course, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.